Okay, so I'm going to start with an apology. Usually by this time of day, my video is finished and it's uploaded and I'm going from, well, clicking on the public button so that it's watchable. Today I had physio this morning, kind of took up most of my morning, came home, had a bit of an afternoon off, had a bit of puppy snuggle time because, well, they grow up so quickly. You've just got to make the most of those puppy snuggles, haven't you? So here we are, kind of late in the evening. No idea if I'll get this out tonight or tomorrow, so apologies for the delays with the upload. Now, I should also probably apologise to anyone who I gave a stress attack with the heading, the title, because we know that Stefan is not innocent. Not by a long shot. But the challenge when you are uploading these videos on YouTube at the moment, or the challenge that I have, is that there seems to be a list of hundreds of words that if you use them in your title, YouTube will demonetize you. So I figured that if I used the word guilty in the title, that I would have this demonetized, I would have to delete it, I would have to edit it and go again. So I thought this was a better option. So hopefully this will prevent this video from being demonetized. So what I'm looking at in this video is, I'm going to start by going through various clips from all these phone calls yet again. Instances where Stefan thinks he's establishing some sort of alibi. Note I said thinks because honestly, the guy's really not that smart. I know his mother claims he has a genius IQ, but I don't know what sort of testing they were using to figure that out, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't the standard testing. I mean, you just have to listen to his BS stories to know that he is far from having a genius IQ. So I'm going to go through those clips, and then at the end of the video I have a handful of clips of interviews with Jen, Stefan and the gate guard, which I'm also going to play, just to kind of tie in with what he's supposed, or what he thinks is establishing in these phone calls. So I think it's just easier if we jump in and you'll understand as we go along. So let's just jump in and see what Stefan has to say in an attempt to try and convince people that he's innocent.
Basic story. Me.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, it's basically, well, obviously this confirms that they're artificially inflating everything up as high as they can possibly do it.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
So I don't know
what'll stick.
What the plan is there. If they're just trying to scare me into pleading down, or I don't know.
So this one goes in the basket of they're trying to fit me up. They're trying to charge me with greater charges than what I deserve, which in his mind is probably an alibi, although it sounds to me that he's saying I'm guilty, but they're trying to make me look even more guilty than I am. But let's be real, this strategy has probably worked for his parents throughout his entire life. He probably used this anytime he got into trouble at school, or at least before he got thrown out of school and had to be homeschooled. Oh, you know, they're making it sound so much worse than it was. It actually wasn't me. They're blaming me, but it wasn't me. And of course, you know, when he stabbed the guy in California, it wasn't me. The guy was so big. And even though I know I have a black belt in Taekwondo or whatever martial art it was, I had to pull a knife because he was going to kill me otherwise. You know, it's never his fault. And I think that's what he's trying to convey here. They're trying to fit him up with a much worse crime when he's actually not guilty of all the things they're saying. And they're trying to scare him into pleading guilty. The irony of this is that this is before they actually filed for the DP, meaning that this guy has a rude awakening coming his way if he thinks this is him being set up. And, you know, really, how much of a defence is this in court? Oh, jurors, no, they're just trying to make it sound so much worse than what it was, just to scare me into pleading guilty. And, you know, it wasn't me, really. Those pictures just accidentally got on my phone, and I don't know how they got there.
I wish there was a way that, you know, you and I can have a conversation, all of us could have a conversation to understand what's taken place, how this came about, how you arrived here, because it would help us better understand the situation, because we're at a loss for understanding how all this came about. I mean, we're just totally baffled.
Well, I didn't start it.
So what's the story there, Stefan? Self-defence? You want to tell people that a 13-year-old girl attacked you and it was just self-defence what you did? Or are you going to say that Jen forced you to go in a room with her and locked you in? I think he has probably used this excuse his entire life with his parents. I didn't start it. It wasn't me. I just happened to be there. Again, it's a pretty poor attempt at a defence, and I'd imagine this is another one that his defence team probably said, yeah, we're not going to use this one, Stefan, because it's not going to fly with a jury. I mean, when you look at what he did, even if he turns around and says, I didn't start this, a jury's going to forget that in 30 seconds once they see what it was he actually did. So, again, epic failure, you silly dweeb.
Well, again, I know you can't talk about this, but it's like, it almost sounds like you didn't know something had happened to her.
Well, I discovered her, in the state that she was in after everything was said and done. So, I mean, obviously I can't get into detail, but no, I was not aware that she had passed on. As you know, I'm up and down throughout the night, and I was not in the room the whole time. I mean, it's not like you just suddenly feel someone's ghost pass away from them. You know, it's a discovery. And
so she wasn't even in the same room with you?
Well, I mean, she was in the room that I started in, but you know, I'm up and down throughout the night, and I tend to wander around the house and fiddle around on my phone and step out front and feel the nice, cool night air and all that. So I was gone from the room for. I mean, obviously, I really can't get into too many details, but yeah.
Okay.
I didn't discover what had happened until just around dawn.
Okay.
You know,
Interesting.
Because I discovered that she was ice cold.
So, this seems to be the alibi that he has settled on, because we hear it more in later phone calls. Yeah, sure, he went to bed in the same room as her, but he wasn't there when she died. He was wandering around the house. He was fiddling with his phone and going outside. And then when he was getting a bit stuck, once again he pulls out I can't go into too many details, But he prefaced it with, after everything was said and done. Well, you've just basically admitted that something happened in that room. Something in which you were involved. So these stories about, well, it happened when I was out of the room. I wasn't in the room the whole time. You've just blown it already by saying that something did actually happen. But, and I mentioned this when I did this particular phone call, the Fitbit data, which they have, will show all his movements for that night. And yes, he did do a factory reset on his phone, but I'm pretty certain that they've probably gone like for the ultimate download, because there's levels of downloads when it comes to phones. So they have probably gone as deep as they can with that phone. And chances are they could tell what was going on with that phone that night. So he can try coming up with these stories, but his Fitbit will basically tell the story all on its own. And I'm pretty certain that the Fitbit that the story that his Fitbit tells won't match this story. Now, what I've mentioned before, he also claims that he discovered her around dawn and she was cold. And as I mentioned in the previous video, it's only a temperature loss of 2 degrees Fahrenheit per hour at the most. So between 1.5 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit an hour is the amount of temperature loss with a deceased person. It takes roughly 12 hours, possibly sooner, but I would say in Florida it probably would take 12 hours for the body to reach a point of being cold to touch. And it's also at that point that full rigour will have set in. Now we know that at dawn that full rigour hadn't set in, because he carried her out and he put her in that car. If full rigour had set in, he wouldn't be able to put her in that car and make it look like she was sitting in the car asleep. He certainly wouldn't have been able to transfer her into the trunk of that vehicle sometime after 9 o'clock that morning. So basically we know that full rigour did not set in until sometime after 9 o'clock that morning. So she wasn't cold at dawn. And the prosecution will be able to prove that. They'll be able to provide the jury with a pretty solid timeline based on Fitbit data, based on all the camera footage of that car, based on all of those things, based on when he went through the gate, etc. So this alibi is not going to hold water. Maybe it's something that his parents believe, because of course you've got that whole confirmation bias. You've heard Deb Stern say that she doesn't believe he's capable of any of these things. So she's going to believe this, that he simply found Maddie. He had nothing to do with what happened. But you've also got to ask the logical question, well, if you didn't do it, who did? Because we know that the right side of the hyoid bone was broken. That doesn't happen on its own. And as someone in the comment section of one of my videos so succinctly put it, 13-year-old children do not die of sudden infant death syndrome.
No, which is why I keep saying that I'm not sure that there's any one person, honestly, to blame. But they're certainly trying to blame me. And according to the autopsy report, like I said, raises a lot more questions, but they seem to be settling on trying to say it's homicide. Like I said, it has something to do with bones in her throat, but take that to mean what you will.
He seems to be pulling out some of the old excuses from the Stephan Stearns playbook. I'm not sure that there's any one person to blame. Well, yes, there is. Because somebody strangled Maddie. I don't think it was a whole group of people who crowded into the townhouse in the middle of the night and did it. So he then tries to make it sound once again like they're trying to fit him up. They seem to be settling on trying to say it's homicide. Meaning, there's a question over that. They can't prove that it's homicide. So this is obviously not something that he's going to try in court because this wouldn't fly. But he's trying to convince his parents at least that no, it wasn't a homicide. They're trying to say it's a homicide because they want to blame me, but it's not really. It's got something to do. They're saying something about bones in her throat. But take that as you will. Okay, Stefan, maybe your parents need to buy you a book. Sorry, the pup wants someone to play with him right now. Maybe, Stefan, your parents should buy you a book explaining forensics. You might find it really interesting to learn about the hyoid bone. It's probably a better read for you than reading It or what was the other Stephen King one, the car one. My brain's just completely fried. All those books that he wants to read. How about some basic forensics? Let's teach you how it is that they're going to basically fry you. So once again, trying to give the impression that he's totally innocent. They're fitting him up. They're trying to say it's homicide, but it's not really. And something about bones in her neck or her throat. But, take that as you will. That's got nothing to do with it as far as he's concerned.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right.
But I would never have done anything like that.
No. Yeah. I mean, you're the same person that cried when I asked you to dispatch a little bird that broke its neck or something and was flopping around.
Yeah, same person that cares about people, cries at movies.
Yes, I know.
And then there was Skippy.
Skippy, yeah. Rue. Jaybird, yep, I remember them all. Burying them was very hard for me.
Yeah.
And
all I know, Stephan, is when I look at a picture of you and I look into your eyes, I don't see a monster there. I don't see a bad person there. I see my son who I love. That never will change.
Well, thank you. And I know that I'm not a bad person or an evil person or a monster.
So the bar is clearly extremely low in terms of convincing his parents that he didn't do it. because he points out that he cries at movies. And he's not a bad person or an evil person or a monster. Is this what he plans on using as part of his defence in court? It wasn't me. It couldn't possibly be me. I was sad when my pets died, and I'm one of these people that cries at movies. Like, my golly gosh. How do we even know that it's not that sort of fake crying like you do in your interviews? You're not very believable. And as for not being a bad person or an evil person or a monster, there's plenty of evidence that proves that to be a completely incorrect statement.
I keep telling God that. I trust you and I have faith in you. Please deliver me from this. Please deliver me from the people who are trying to destroy me.
You know, I almost hope that the defence team is dumb enough to use this argument that people are trying to destroy Stefan. Because honestly, no juror is going to believe that. And that is going to be the fastest way to get a jury offside. I would imagine that when you look at how experienced so many of the detectives are that we've seen in this case, I'd imagine they've done plenty of stints where they've had to go in as a witness in court. So they're going to sound credible in court. So should he attempt to use this argument in court, the jury's just going to look at him and just think, you're a complete utter tosser. Grow a brain, you dork.
I don't want to get your hopes up, and as I said, don't get carried away with any conspiracy theories, but in a way I was compromised, and, when all that stuff was happening, I was not in my right mind anymore.
Yeah. Well, I understand that, and that's when you probably should have just called me and said, hey, I've got a bit of a situation here, and
That would have been a rational thing to do, but at that point I was no longer capable of rational actions or thoughts.
Yep, I understand. Yep.
And capable of it, I had no control over my faculties anymore. It's like the motor was running, but there was a screaming chimpanzee behind the wheel.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing this is probably going to be his defence in court. Temporary insanity? Or what was it he said later on? Catastrophic mental breakdown? He had a bunch of screaming chimpanzees in his head or something like that. Well, he can't claim to be no longer capable of rational answers and thoughts, because you can hear in the argument, in the interviews, that he was being quite rational with his answers. And he was certainly thinking rationally enough to take actions that were going to basically avoid him being, or he believed were going to avoid him being arrested. That wasn't someone who wasn't capable of rational thoughts. That is someone who was being extremely calculating and looking at the consequences of their action and figuring out how they could actually try and get out of that. You don't factory reset your phone if you are no longer capable of rational answers and thoughts. You don't put a 13-year-old child in your car who is deceased, drive around, and then transfer her to the trunk of your car if you are no longer capable of rational answers. He was trying to give the impression that he had driven her to school. You don't then drive out to a secluded area and attempt to hide her in a secluded area. He was thinking things through. He even thought things through to the point where he reset his phone a second time and made a 6-hour round trip down to Northport to remove a hard drive from his computer. That's all very, very calculating. So he can try to use this argument, but we know that the prosecution are just going to slap it down so quickly.
That's okay.
Don't get your hopes up for any conspiracy theories or vast conspiracies. Just understand that anything I did was not done while being within my rational mind. I had snapped at that point. And I wish I had done the correct thing to begin with. I wish I had run downstairs and shaken her awake and called 911 and all that. And deserved
Well, I wish you had too. I wish you had too. Maybe she could have been saved, but
she was beyond that.
Okay.
When someone's that ice cold and just gone.
She was in a different part of the house?
Yeah.
Again, trying to reinforce this notion that his mind just snapped. He completely lost sanity when he discovered that Maddie was deceased and didn't know how to do the right thing. Well, BS. I'm sorry, but even if you weren't thinking rationally, even if you had discovered what had occurred, why would you do things that are going to make you look so much more guilty? Now, we know that they've got DNA evidence. They've got proof from his Fitbit, proof from his mobile phone. They have statements from housemates, from Jen, even from the gate guard, that are basically going to refute this argument of him not being in his right mind. But it seems he's going to try and push it.
She wasn't with you?
Well, she had gone to be with me earlier in the night, but I left her alone for quite a while I was sort of just walking around and, haunting around the house like I do. Sometimes I go out for walks at night, or I'll just sit on the couch and just fiddle around on my phone, or just, I don't sleep well at night, especially when I've got to be up early and do something the next day.
Yeah.
And that was the case. So every time I realized anything was wrong, it was
She was in a different part of the house when you found that out?
She was still upstairs.
Oh, she was upstairs. Okay.
Yeah, I left her alone there.
Oh, okay.
I had gone downstairs for a while, and by the time I realized anything was wrong, it was just far too late. She'd been gone for a while.
So, having attempted to explain his actions after Maddie's death as him having lost the plot, now he's trying to explain away that period of time when Maddie died, saying he wasn't even in the room at the time. Sure, they started off in the same room, but you know what he's like. He's always in and out of the room. So don't look at him, because he went for a walk and he went and he sat downstairs and sat on the couch and fiddled with his phone for a while. And no, he was absent. This is not going to hold water. Why? Because you would have to prove that it is more likely that someone else did it. You cannot place anyone else in that room. You cannot place anyone in the vicinity of Maddie at the time that she died. And of course, whose DNA was it that was found on Maddie? Yours, Stephan. Do you want to try and claim that it was a drug overdose? But there's that pesky hyoid bone, which never lies. How are you going to explain that one? So you can claim that you were out of the room, but the fact that you were in the room with her at multiple times through that night puts you number one on the list. You can claim that when you found her, she was already cold, but it only takes a decent forensic scientist to go on the stand in the courtroom and explain that that wouldn't be possible because that would mean that you were absent from the room for 12 hours and that you didn't discover her till sometime after 11 o'clock the following morning, based on when she was supposedly last seen. Well, that doesn't work because they have you on camera with her in the vehicle at 7:30 the following morning. Please explain that.
With all that screaming and yelling and crap going on, I'm surprised
It's
it's
kind
dead.
of, honestly, it wasn't that far out of place in that house. You know, was often given to yelling or loud crying or outbursts, and it was given to yelling and screaming and coming down on people. It was happening a lot more and more often, which is why I kept trying to tell you know, I think maybe your meds are becoming less effective. It seems like you're becoming more erratic and more unstable. It seemed like the more stable I became, the more unstable she became, like we switched places.
So you've got Deb with this story where she believes Jen has gone into a mental hospital. Of course, we know none of that is proven, so we're not going to go with any of that. That is sheer speculation. But Stefan's jumping on that. That's extremely convenient for him. And now, having claimed that he wasn't even in the room, he's now turning around and trying to set up a defence that makes Jen look culpable, saying that she was becoming more and more erratic. She was problematic. There was a problem with her medication and she needed to have that checked out. Essentially trying to establish the notion here that Jen snapped and did something to Maddie. Well, we've seen so many interviews with Jen. She is not erratic. There's no mood swings. It's mostly just sloth level moods. Yeah, you get a reaction from her at particular times. The detectives gauged her by coming up with that story that we saw the interview with Fox News and you said you didn't want Maddie to come home. And you immediately get a reaction from her. I didn't say that. So proving that she is capable of emotional reactions. We also saw the emotional reactions when she suddenly realised that Stefan had been cheating on her with her own daughter for all that time. Or at least when it was pointed out to her, because I think she knew. Emotional reactions about her birthday going to be a crappy birthday. They were emotional reactions that you could tell were connected to rational thoughts. There was nothing up and down in her reactions. She wasn't out of control. So they're going to have a really hard time proving that also. Especially when you take into account the fact that this is a relatively lengthy time frame in which we have various interviews of Jen. The first interview occurred on the 26th, the final one on the 1st of March. So it's occurred over a number of days. If she was being erratic, you would see that come through. So that argument's just not going to work. Meanwhile, when you're recording audio and your nearly 4-month-old pup is chewing something behind you, don't just presume that he's just playing with one of his toys. Otherwise, you might find yourself down one pair of shoes.
You know, I guess I reacted to everything the way I did because I wanted to shield her. I wanted to keep her from getting any blowback from him, but
You shouldn't have. You shouldn't have, because that left them only one person to lay everything on. That was you.
yep. And you know, I should have just done the correct thing from the get-go and let the chips fall where they may. But I couldn't stand the idea of losing them both horribly like that, and I lost them both anyway.
So, in case you missed it, that was a direct accusation of Jen. So he's saying that he did all the things that he did to shield Jen because he didn't want to lose them both. Essentially what he's saying there, that he'd lost Maddie, and if he didn't do the things that he did, then Jen would have been arrested, essentially saying that it's all Jen's fault and Jen was responsible, and that he acted because he couldn't stand the thought of losing Jen. Do you really believe that? These things he's saying where he acts like he's concerned for Jen, that's complete utter BS. This is an act on his part because he knows he's got to act like he cares about Jen to hide the fact that his number one obsession was with Maddie. So he's saying these things basically to cover his ass. Honestly, the guy is so narcissistic. Do you truly believe that had Jen been the one responsible for Maddie's death, that he would have done all those things to cover for her? Not a chance. Not a snowball's chance. He's saying this to give the impression to his parents that Jen was responsible and that he basically was being so chivalrous and covering up for her to prevent her being arrested for Maddie's death. This is probably something he's used his entire life. He's probably, you know, the instance where he stabbed the guy in California was probably a case of, well, actually, it wasn't me that stabbed him, but I said it was me because my other friend would have got into so much trouble for it, and I didn't want to see him get into trouble, so I claimed that it was me. I claimed that it was my pocket knife, when it wasn't really. Although, you know, we hear from his parents that in that instance they do believe that he did it. But you know what I'm talking about. I could imagine times when he has gotten into, when he was still at school, when he got into trouble for things and said, I took the rap because I was protecting my friend. And that would just make Mummy Deb just so happy that her son was so chivalrous and so caring. And then she'd forget the whole thing. Because why punish him when it wasn't even his fault? So I think he's gotten away with this sort of thing his entire life. and now he thinks this is going to be an adequate defence, forgetting how easy it's going to be to prove that actually he was the one responsible.
There was just so much agony and so much pain, so much shock and so much trauma. My mind was just not, it wasn't me anymore. I wasn't in control of myself anymore. I was doing things that I wouldn't do. I wasn't acting or thinking rationally. It was just panic and fear and...
Okay, let's talk about it, since once again he's claiming that he was not in control of himself and that he was suffering with panic and fear. What happens in the brain when someone is in a state of panic or fear? That's your, I think it's, is it the hippocampus? It's somewhere in the frontal lobe. And what happens is you get a fight, flight or freeze response. Fight, you fight back, obviously. It's not about being calculated and doing the things that he did. Flight, you flee from the situation, meaning you let's just go back to, okay, he discovers Maddie is cold in the bed. Fight reaction is that he's going to go down and accuse Jen. Maybe he's going to go and punch a hole in the wall or something. That's that kind of reaction. That doesn't fit with what he's saying here about panic and fear, and in terms of, well, I calculated all these things that I did and did all these things. Flight, you're going to get the heck out of there. You're not rationalising. You find a 13-year-old child deceased. You get the heck out of there. You don't go and pick her up and carry her out to your car and then drive around and then transfer her to the trunk of your car. Freeze, you do nothing. The speculation in terms of the Idaho 4 is that those girls, those other flatmates, froze and found themselves in a state where they couldn't think what to do, so they basically did nothing. Speculated that the one that was upstairs ran downstairs to the room of the girl downstairs. That's your freeze, flight and freeze. That's the explanation being given for the lapse in time between when it occurred and when 911 was finally called. Stefan's actions do not fit anywhere with fight, flight or freeze. He was calculating. He planned his actions. He acted according to what he thought was going to get him out of it all. There's no sign of panic or fear in the way he acted.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
You know, Stefan, I can't help but get the feeling that none of this that was on the phone was a surprise to you.
She was aware that I had certain feelings towards me.
Yeah. Well, then why would she send her in there to sleep with you?
She used to joke about it, call it an Electra Complex. Used to joke and say, you better not leave me for my daughter when she's older, things like that. Laugh about it, and they used to both ogle over me and comment on me and talk about me together and giggle and talk about how nice I looked, and it was not an appropriate situation.
Now, on one hand, this definitely confirms to me that Jen knew about what was going on between Stefan and Maddie. He talks about an Electra Complex, which is similar to the whole Woody Allen thing. But of course, Stefan, thinking he's smart, has to go with Freud, doesn't he? It's actually what you would normally see with a child between the ages of like 3 and 6, a little girl, where they are competing with their mother for possession of their father, essentially. It's that competition for the attention, but it's a more of a childlike thing. What he's doing here is sexualizing it. Basically saying that Jen and Maddie were both competing to have him. He's got tickets on himself, hasn't he? So he's basically now blaming the photos on Jen and on Maddie. He's saying it wasn't an appropriate situation. He's trying to give the impression that he didn't like it, he didn't want to be a part of it, and they forced it on him. He's almost accusing Maddie of, well, you know where I'm going with this. There's so many words that come to mind to describe young girls who go after men. But we know that's not the situation. He's basically, this is a classic narcissistic move. It wasn't my fault. Jen forced it on me. Maddie pursued me. I had no control over the situation. I don't know how that even justifies him taking photos. It's a poor argument, but it's certainly got nothing to do with the images either.
No, it wasn't.
And, I always had an issue with boundaries. She never respected any boundaries that I tried to set. We've gotten arguments on more than one occasion about the sleeping arrangement, so I, would beg her, please make her go sleep in her own room. And she said, well, no, it's easier this way for me to wake her up when she's near me. And, it's like we didn't have any privacy, and, just didn't have any space to ourselves. And she would suggest, well, maybe you should go sleep in bed instead. And it's like, it's like a twin bed, and I'm, 6+ feet, and no, why would I want to do that instead of sleeping in our king-size bed, I should have broken up with her a long time ago and just distanced myself.
Oh, hell yeah.
It is such a stretch to try and claim that the images on his phone occurred because of boundary issues, and not his boundary issues. Once again, he's putting it on Jen and Maddie. And he's claiming that he begged Jen to make Maddie sleep in her own room. Now, there's one thing in there that I suspect is a little glimmer of truth. Him saying that he wouldn't sleep in the double bed because of how tall he is. Is that how all this started? Him insisting that he needed to sleep in Jen's big bed, where Maddie just happened to be sleeping because of how tall he was. Because I could see, I had wondered how it all started. And that makes sense to me. Because you can hear how very manipulative he is when you listen to all the phone calls. So to me, that makes me think that, yes, maybe at some point in time, that's how it all began. He wanted to have them all share the big bed because he was too tall for the other beds. Although, how does that explain still having Maddie in there? And how does it explain taking those photos? Even if she forced you to sleep in a room with just Maddie, and you were so pathetic as to not simply pack your bags and walk out the door straight away the moment it was suggested, which any decent person would do, explain the images on your phone. Because you are talking about two entirely separate things. Maybe Jen played a role in encouraging Maddie to share a bed with you. Personally, I think it was all about Stefan manipulating Jen and Maddie and putting those ideas in their heads for his own personal gain. But there's no way any of this can explain the images on his phone. Oh, well, she forced me to do it, so I thought I might as well just take photos while I was at it. Or, well, Maddie took all those photos. I'm surprised he didn't try that as his next stunt. I didn't take those photos. Not my idea. All this was forced on me. Poor little Stephan. Once again, he's trying an argument that's really not going to stand up in court.
Yep, I know it's very thin chances, but I hope that you and Mom will pray for me to get that second chance. Okay? And for God to hear my prayers in regards to that, to deliver me from this situation and from the people that are wanting to destroy me.
So, clearly he got the reaction he wanted when he said to his parents that people were trying to destroy him. Because now he's pushing this again and again. Like I said before, this is not any sort of defence argument. This is not going to hold water in court.
Were you awake when sent her into the room with you?
Yeah.
And she was fine when she came into your room? What time at night was that?
Maybe 11-ish or so, I'm not sure.
Okay, so she was fine, so what happens between 11 and whenever you found her?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? She went
Yeah. I mean, when you say you were out of the room, for what length of time were you out of the room?
I don't know.
15 minutes?
No. I left the room a couple times. The first time I left to go to the bathroom, and second time I was out of the room for maybe a couple hours or so, maybe more. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Well, that was plenty of time for the one-armed man to do it.
Well, without getting into too much detail, she was acting kind of weird before she went to sleep, so I don't know what was going on there. But,
acting weird, like having difficulty?
Just strange behavior, acting loopy.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm not sure.
Could she have been drugged?
I honestly can't get into too many details, just because I don't want to hurt my case, but I have some suspicions in that regard. Whether it was given to her by anyone or whether she helped herself, there are reasons to believe she may have done that as well.
So, ignore the broken hyoid bone. Let's look at the toxicology. Because it sounds to me like if he has actually looked at the autopsy report, I'm guessing that the toxicology report shows something interesting in the results. Because now he's essentially trying to claim that Maddie died from a drug overdose. And he's inferring here that it was either administered by Jen or Maddie helped herself. I think there's also a little element of truth there when he says whether it was given to her by someone else or she took it for herself. Yeah, well, if it is what happened, we know it was given to her by someone else, and we're pretty certain we can narrow that down as to who that was. And we're not talking Jen. The thing is, there's evidence on Jen's phone of Stefan having given Maddie something in the past. Something that wasn't her regular medication. So, it's not a good route for him to be going down, because it's going to backfire. But basically, it appears that his attempt here is to ignore the broken hyoid bone and focus in on whatever kind of medications were found in Maddie's system. Again, it's just not going to hold water. Why? Because we know that the cause of death for Maddie was actually listed as strangulation. So regardless of whether or not there were different drugs in her system that were given to her by someone else, basically they're going to be able to say, well, this is what caused Maddie's death. You are the only person who can be placed in the room with her. Hence, you are the person responsible. And of course, all his actions following that also point to major guilt. So, I mean, he's clutching at straws here. I really don't think he's going to be able to come up with any plausible defence. I mean, the guy's such a dweeb. He's just got no concept of plausible deniability. He comes up with all these half-cocked stories that just don't stand up to simple scrutiny.
And she passed away. I suffered a catastrophic mental breakdown at that point. I don't know if you know that.
No, I did not.
And I was literally out of my mind when I was first booked into jail. I was hallucinating. I was hearing things and seeing things very badly. And it took me about a week to come out of that.
I hope you're sharing all that with your attorneys.
I did, and the mental health people knew about it as well because, they're the ones that interview you when you come in. They're like, are you seeing anything? Are you hearing anything? I was like, yes, to both. I was hearing reverberating noises going through my cell and in my head, and I would look at the doors, and it looked like the doors were breathing. And then it took me about a week to come out of that, and then it took me another 3 weeks or so before I started to regain some lucidity in my mind and some clarity again. And it took me a while to come out of that. I don't think you guys knew that.
No, did not.
So I was not in my right mind after I found her.
This guy is so incredibly calculating, isn't he? Claiming that he had a catastrophic mental breakdown. But let's look at what he's saying here. He's saying this occurred after he was booked. Well, I'd imagine that in some regards he was having a bit of a catastrophic, not mental breakdown, but realisation. Basically, this was the first time in his life where he didn't get away with something. First time in his life when his parents couldn't fix it. Where he's actually had to face the consequences. So I'd imagine that on a mental health level, this probably was a little bit traumatising for him. Mummy and Daddy couldn't fix it, and they actually arrested him. But that's not the same as a catastrophic mental breakdown. He was fully in control of his mental facilities. He was just depressed, I would say. But let's think about it a bit more. Does this work as a defence? Is he trying to say that the fact that he had this shows that he's innocent because it had such a dire effect on him when he was arrested because he thought he was innocent? Maybe that's what he's trying to claim. Don't know. It'd be interesting to hear what sort of things his lawyer claims in court. I think this is calculated to manipulate his parents, but he's also probably heard the term catastrophic mental breakdown, which actually I've not seen it anywhere, and I'm not sure if this is just him having been told to stop catastrophizing things. No, I didn't say that right. I can never pronounce it properly, but you know what I mean. Stop being a drama queen, basically. Suck it up, princess. You're here. You need to adjust your thinking and cope with being here, essentially. But let's acknowledge something else. So he's saying that this lasted about a week. Well, if it was an actual catastrophic mental breakdown, you're not going to snap out of it in a week. It would take a lot of time to come out of it. So what was probably happening here? He was coming down off non-prescription drugs, basically. Suddenly he went from having God knows what in his system to having nothing. Now, even if he had prescribed medications, that's not something where when they booked him in he can say, well, I have this, this and this prescribed by my doctor, and they go, okay, we'll have those for you tomorrow morning when we do the first medicine round. No. He would have to actually see a GP at whatever time that person is basically there at the prison. But in the meantime, if he's coming down off drugs, and I mean this is a prison, they're going to know what it looks like if someone is coming down off a whole range of drugs. They're not going to start him on regular prescribed drugs until he's finished coming down off whatever he's on. Because there's a safety issue there. At the end of the day, they don't want to lose their jobs for putting him on drugs that may have an impact while he's coming down off God knows what else. So they needed to make sure that the all other stuff was out of his system before they could start medicating him. Hence the reason why he's saying that he was seeing things and hearing things for a week and all that blah 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 yada yada crap. Yeah, because he was coming down. And the reason it took several weeks after that for them to level him out was because obviously they had to figure out what medications they could put him on. They would have probably got his medical records, I guess. But of course, his medical records are only going to show prescribed drugs, not the additional drugs that he was getting hold of. And I would imagine that something like Adderall is not going to be allowed in a prison because it is highly tradable. So there are certain limitations on what medications inmates could have, I would imagine. So basically what he's talking about here has got nothing to do with Maddie. And it's certainly not any form of defence. And in fact, I don't think even his lawyer would bother trying to use it as a defence.
a complete mental and emotional breakdown, and then everything that followed was kind of a result of that.
Oh, well,
I wish I'd handled that passing a lot better, but I was not capable of rational thoughts or actions at that point. I literally was not in my right mind.
Okay, so now he's gone back to I had a breakdown when I saw Maddie. So he's giving two separate stories here. One is that he had this catastrophic meltdown, basically when he was booked in. But then he's switching back and forth between that and that this occurred when he saw Maddie and he was no longer capable of rational thoughts or feelings or whatever. I've mentioned several times now how he has demonstrated quite clearly that he was capable of rational thoughts. So, since it seems that he's going to attempt this whole I wasn't in my right mind defence, this is where it becomes necessary to look back at the interviews that occurred after Maddie went missing, prior to when he was arrested, and also to look back at interviews with other people. So that is the end of the phone calls, and like I said at the beginning of this video, what I'm going to do now is go through, first of all, his story that he gave detectives, and then listen to comments by Jen and by Alex, the security guard from the gate.
When you guys woke up and took her to school and all that?
So we woke up early. The plan was that we were going to get McDonald's breakfast on the way, so we made amazingly good time
I don't mean to interrupt you, okay? Neither of us were here yesterday, so if you can be kind of like specific about like times and stuff like that, okay?
Woke up around 7:15, somewhere around there, which is an early start for us, but we had talked about getting McDonald's breakfast beforehand, so we wanted to make good time. We did make good time. We got out the door maybe 7:30ish, 7:45ish, maybe. Got over to that area. She was asleep in the car most of the time, just snoozing until we got there. We got to McDonald's. We're close to McDonald's. I said, "Do you still want it?" Wasn't interested in the McDonald's anymore, so we continued on. And she wanted to be dropped off a little down the ways from the school. She's got this phase that she's been into lately where she's very particular about what car she's seen getting out of in front of the school. She prefers my cars are, I guess, kind of hoopties. I get it. It's an image thing. But that was sometime probably between 8:20 and 8:40ish, somewhere in there. It was along this stretch of the road that on the right side that has all the communities on it before you get to the overpass. You could see the overpass from where it was. So it was on that side, on that stretch of road, and that's where I dropped her off. She said she was going to go wait for her friends. She was going to go find them and hang out and wait for her friends. And I asked if that was going to be okay. She said, yeah, it's fine. Kids get dropped off early enough as it is. It's not totally unusual for that to happen. It's just not usually that early that I drop her off. I do school runs every once in a while for her. I said, okay. Let her out. Have a good day. Love you. Thanks. Love you too. And I turned around and was driving away and was watching her in my rearview mirror to make sure that she was going where she was supposed to go. And she was moving in that direction, but she was rummaging around in her backpack or something. What I assumed was probably headphones or something like that, but I found out later that she forgot her phone here, so she may have been rummaging for her phone.
Now, does that sound like someone who is incapable of rational thought to you? He has come up with an extremely complex story about this trip to school. But not only that, when questioned about times, he manages to adapt his story and add in times. But the times don't actually match with the times that would appear on camera. No, in his head, he's made the adjustment for what would be a reasonable time to be taking Maddie to school. So instead of saying that they left at 7:30 in the morning and all that sort of stuff, he's now changing the times to fit in with a slightly early school drop-off. And then he's even adding in details to fit in with Maddie's phone being left at the apartment. So she was rummaging around in her bag as she walked away from him, looking for something. And of course, we're supposed to believe that she was looking for her phone because she'd left her phone at home. So there is a lot of rational thought that's gone into this. He has been quite capable of coming up with this complex narrative, essentially, with so many pieces to it, where he's trying to explain a bunch of things with his little stories. Does this sound like someone who is incapable of rational thought at this point in time? Because he sounds quite lucid, and he's put together, he's made up a pretty complicated story there. So his alibi is just not going to hold water. And let's have a listen to what Jen had to say about that particular morning.
Can't recall what he's wearing. It might be a red shirt with a graphic on it.
Okay.
He's sitting in my bedroom on my desk.
Prior to you getting there, he's in your room? Or is that where you guys go to talk?
That he was hanging out there in my room.
Okay.
My room is kind of like the general hangout spot.
Okay.
I walk into my room. He's sitting there on the computer chair. He's talking, acting normal, asking about the morning and how everything went, and that he let me know the errands that he ran that morning or what he was up to.
And what did he say he was up to?
He said he had dropped Maddie off at school and then afterwards went to a vape shop so he can buy vaping things.
Okay.
But that the store wasn't open, so he waited a long time for them to open. They never did. So he drove around, killed time, and then eventually made it back to my house at like 10:20.
Okay, let's for just one moment pretend that Jen isn't lying about him being at the townhouse when she got back from her appointment, and is, or maybe she's just confused with times and she's forgetting that he actually got back to the townhouse after her. But she's describing him sitting in her bedroom, just doing everyday normal things, and she says he was acting normal. Well, this is someone who supposedly would know if he was acting irrationally or thinking irrationally. And apparently, according to Jen, there were no red flags. Now, we know Jen is a big fat liar. We also know that what she's saying there didn't happen that way because Jen returned to the townhouse after he had left again to go to the vape store. And they actually weren't together in the townhouse till roughly 11:45 or 10 to 12 when he returned from the vape store. And then he left again roughly 40 minutes later. So her story here is wrong, but it sucks for him because Jen's lies, truths or lies, whatever they are, basically are saying that he was perfectly normal that day. There was nothing that caused her to ask questions. Yes, we could go down that rabbit hole of, well, apparently Jen doesn't ask questions about anything. but it's not looking good for him. Now let's say that this plays out in court and the defence team does completely obliterate Jen's story. We still have the security guard. So let's have a listen to that.
You were working on Monday, the 26th? Okay. Do you remember a resident coming through in a silver Lincoln sedan?
I do remember, but not his face. I talked to him. He showed me his little clicker, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm clicking. It's not working." And then I went and I clicked the button. He went inside, and I just remember there was a woman like sleeping beside him with a green shirt.
A green shirt. Okay. Do you remember what time that was around?
In the morning.
In the morning. Okay. But so he pulled up because I know you have a resident lane and then like the guest lane.
Yeah, it was like.
So he was in the which lane?
The resident. Like,
okay. And he had a clicker with him, and he's like, "Hey, it's not working." Okay. Did you get a good look at the girl at all?
No.
No. Could you tell like age or gender, race, anything like that? No. Okay. But you said she was wearing something green.
Yeah, and she was like apparently sleeping, like kind of like this.
Okay. Did she say anything?
No.
No. Okay. And he didn't say anything else?
No.
Did he seem to be acting normal, or did he seem nervous at all?
No, normal.
Normal?
Yeah, I didn't notice, like, I was even with a car here on the cone, and I went there, but he was normal. He's just like, "Hey, my clicker's not working."
So there was nothing there about the interaction between the guard and Stefan that made the security guard think there was anything wrong. He said that Stefan was acting normal. The only reason he's even aware of the encounter was because Stefan couldn't get the gate clicker to work. He thought that Maddie was asleep in the passenger side of the car. Now, had he got any idea from Stefan that something was a bit screwy, he would have paid attention to all the minute details in that car and may have actually questioned the fact that Maddie wasn't moving or talking. May have expressed concern to the officers, but he wasn't concerned. He said, no, the guy was acting normal. He just said, "Hey, dude, my gate clicker's not working," and I helped him out and then he left. So, to all intents and purposes, there is no evidence whatsoever of Stefan having any sort of mental breakdown after discovering Maddie deceased. So, looking at the arguments he's got, on one hand, he's trying to claim these mental breakdowns. One apparently occurred straight after he discovered Maddie deceased. Another one, which is pretty poor and isn't going to work as a defence anyway, is he had a catastrophic mental breakdown when he was booked in. Well, there's so much evidence to show that he was more than capable of rational thinking. He wasn't acting or thinking irrationally after he supposedly discovered Maddie deceased. What about this story of he had nothing to do with it, he went out of the room and then he found Maddie that way? Well, that's not going to hold water either. Like I said, you've got the issue of the body cooling. We know that rigour did not set in until after he placed her in the trunk of the car, which occurred sometime after 9 o'clock. I think it was about 20 past 9. It occurred between then and between about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, when he placed her in the paddock. Because we know that basically the position that she was found in is suggestive of the fact that she reached full rigour while she was in the trunk of the vehicle. I'm not going to go too much into that because I don't want to trigger people. So, in which case, now a body becomes cool to touch in about the same time as it takes rigor to set in. Roughly 12 hours. It loses 2 degrees Fahrenheit per hour. Well, given that rigor hadn't set in at 7:30 when he left the apartment, his story of finding her cold is not going to hold water at all. Trying to say that Maddie probably took some drugs. We know that the cause of death is strangulation. And they're saying homicide. So, while I believe that from what he's saying, I think we are going to find that the toxicology report shows additional drugs in her system that shouldn't have been there. I think at the same time, that's not going to help him. First of all, you have those text messages of Jean confronting him 12 months prior to this, saying that she believes that he gave Maddie additional drugs that weren't Maddie's regular drugs. You've got no history of Maddie trying to take anything for herself. In fact, you have interviews with her friends saying that Maddie didn't like the way her medications made her feel, and she didn't want to be on her medications. So, while these excuses may have worked with his parents, that's all they are. They're excuses. This is something that he has done his entire life, manipulated his parents by coming up with stories that make him innocent. The thing is, juries don't have that emotional connection. Juries don't have the confirmation bias that his parents do. So these stories just aren't going to hold water because there's too much evidence to prove that they are wrong. So in terms of a defence, I don't think anything that we've heard in this video is going to hold water in court. So I think we can be quite confident that as infuriating as it is, as frustrating as it is, we can at least be reassured that this just basically shows what a POS Stephan Stearns is. And it's nothing that we need to worry about in terms of the legal side of things. Yep, we can be angry with him. He deserves for us to be angry with him. We can be angry at his parents for accepting this. And yes, they do deserve some of that. They should be putting their foot down here and saying, Stephan, these stories don't hold water. Like I said, they've got the confirmation bias, or Deb at this point in time certainly does. So she's going to believe anything he tells her. And that is frustrating for us to hear because we know the truth. But this is a woman who's done that her whole life. So, you know, she's got a long journey ahead of her to be able to accept what he did. And I think also there is that element of guilt for her because no matter how you look at it, these parents have enabled him his entire life. They've allowed him to tell these stories his entire life and never ever put their foot down and said, stop BSing, Stephan, suck it up, stop acting like a princess, tell the truth, face the consequences. He's never had to face consequences because of them. So, on that note, I'll finish it there. Thank you for listening. If you are new to my channel, please do subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.